So we can go ahead and start working on the grills now, and I like to go from the trucks, underframe, up to the sides of the locomotive, and then I hit the pilots last. But I'm going to come in here with the dark earth again, and this, with the powders, you do have to be a little bit cautious. A little goes a long way, so I really only like to apply a little bit at a time. Another thing you got to be a little bit wary of too is this stuff likes to kind of spread all over the place very quickly. So you need to kind of be careful where your powder is going, because if it gets on areas like this, say you don't want to get powder down here, it'll stain it real bad. So you have to be a little bit careful where your powder is going. So let's say you didn't want to get the powder in this area. What you would do is you would go this direction and work the powder away from this area and up and off the model. That's how you would do that. In this particular case, I'm not too worried about that, but that's just something I wanted to point out. But I'm just going to go in here, give it that little bit of color detail. And in this particular case, I will be working some of this color down, not too much, just a little bit, just to add that little bit of color detail where you can see some of the fresh rust, some of that dark grime, some of that nice dark grime kind of coming down from that area. Kind of fan it out a little bit. I know it sounds like I'm putting a lot of pressure on the side here with the brush, but I'm really not. It's just gliding over the surface here. I'm not trying to scrub any of the work that I've done underneath all this off. I'm not trying to scrub clear coat off or anything. I'm just brushing and fanning the work out. After I've done that, now I can go back and I can go and start adding some of the black. And the black is a very overpowering color as well, and this is one I do want to be a little bit careful of, so I'm going to be working this up and off the model like this as I go. If it gets up top here, I'm not too worried about that because I'm going to be doing a lot of soot effects on the top anyway. I'm just going to be working that, getting that little bit of color difference. I'll go ahead and just add a little bit more of that, brown too. Layer it just a little bit more, just so have a little bit more color detail there. There we go. Okay. Now I'm going to add just a little bit of this darker grime coming down with the soot black. I'm going to be applying this very gently, like this, just kind of streaking down from that grill. I'll get some of it kind of tucked behind the cab too, because this areas like that generally around the cab, a lot of that exhaust will kind of collect there, so I want to have some of that grime and older soot kind of running down the side of the car body here, just like this. But I'm doing it very gently. It doesn't take that much. You can see it's not that much. It's a very subtle little effect, and it spreads very well, so a little goes a long way here. Pretty much the same technique on the Radiator. It's pretty much going to be the same technique on the dynamic blister grill here. I'm just going to be switching up the brush though. I'm using a liner brush for this. I'm going to go in and I'm going to start applying these powders very gradually into the grill like this. Working my way up. As I go down the hood, I'm again going to be putting in some of those heavier streaks with just a little bit of that black powder, just like this. So again, add some color detail just to the little areas I want. Mainly on the gray here. I'm not too worried about the yellow. You can even spread it that way a little bit, get a little bit more even coverage. And then as long as you return to going into even straight streaks like this, going upwards, moving upwards or downwards, however you're doing that, as long as you get the streaks the direction that the streaks are going to be traveling, which is down, as the rainwater comes up on the top of the locomotive, it'll streak a lot of that grime down. So that's why you want to really concentrate that color in a streak form like this, and it's really easy to do with the right brush and these powders. And I'll just streak a little bit of that down onto the yellow now. On the large intake grill here, I'm going to be going pretty heavy with the black. We do have the grills painted black, but I want to go ahead and add the sooty black as well. So again, just give some more of that color detail to these. And I'll just very, very carefully go in, and I'm just going to brush some of that light rust very gently into the grill. I'm not trying to punch the grill out either. Remember that we had to glue these in place. I had mentioned that a long time ago. I'm just gently working that color in here. I'm not trying to scrape paint off either. It's a very gentle application. Just for some more color difference, a little bit of color detail, maybe some rust starting to kind of collect on these grill grates here. Just apply that very gently. Okay, we're rolling right along here. Let's go ahead and reinstall our underbody detailing. The side frames have stayed off up to this point. We're ready to go ahead and reinstall these now that the trucks are finished. And then I got the fuel tank, which is pretty much completed. All we got to do now is add the chocks and powders to that, mainly powders. And then all the powder work has to be done to the trucks as well. So we'll go ahead and reinstall these, and I'll come back and we'll get started on these parts. Okay, you can see all the underbody details are back on, the trucks are in place, and the fuel tank is in place. The tricky thing with these tunnel motors, if you're going to do these kinds of modifications like adding waste retention tanks, anything like that, is that you got to watch the spacing, especially on the back truck, because with that waste retention tank on the back, this rear truck might not swivel all the way properly. So I really had to adjust the fuel tank a little bit here to get it to be just enough space in between this for the truck to swivel freely. As you can see, it's completely free motion. Same thing with the front truck. And the only way I could reinstall this fuel tank without that waste retention tank bumping into the rear truck was to move the fuel tank slightly in front. And that's kind of the issue that a lot of people have with these tunnel motors, is that the spacing is actually incorrect. I think it's the frame itself, and the spacing on the fuel tank is completely wrong. One of the best ways to fix this issue is to actually shorten the fuel tank and make it the correct distance, but that's just too much work. I'm not going to chop up the fuel tank, but it's just something I wanted to point out here. If you guys are going to do any kind of modernization to a fuel tank like this on one of these tunnel motors, watch the truck spacing. You're going to have to readjust the fuel tank on these most of the time to get the trucks to swivel freely, because they do get caught up on these if you add all these extra details. That's the big problem and hindrance with these Athearn tunnel motors. Starting with the rear truck here, I'm going to take some of that dark earth color. I'm going to start working this into the top portion of the truck, just highlighting certain details. A lot of that dustier rust is going to collect at the top of the truck frame, areas like the top of the fuel tank, that kind of thing. That's where that color is really going to collect. Some of it will work down the side of the truck frame, which we'll do here in a second, but right now I'm just getting the coverage on the top of the truck frame, and I'm using a small liner brush here to do this. And I'll go ahead and start working some of that color down the side of the truck. I'm using a very light brush motion and a very small amount of this rust color. I really don't want to go too crazy on that. I just want to have those color differences. Hit up those tanks a little bit, hit up the brake line a little bit, but just add it in random little areas, just like this. Get some on this brake rigging down here as well. Sorry, my hand keeps getting in front of the tripod, I apologize. I'm trying not to, but I always say it's kind of hard because of the way my workbench is set up. I have to have my camera right in front of me. I can't really do it any other way. What I basically do is I take my fan brush and I load it up pretty good and full of powders. I'll kind of take some of that off, just like that. You can see that just the front of the brush is loaded up with that, and I'll come in here and I'll just start lightly dusting the truck. And you may have to do this a couple times just to build up the coats of this, but I like to have a lot of that sand dust, road grime build up, because the trucks and the fuel tank especially are going to be where you see a lot of that dust build up, and this is just a very light application of this. Switching now to some black, I'm going to be doing some grime work on the journals right here. There usually is a good accumulation of dark grimy grease that builds up on these parts, and so what I like to do is just paint these black, or not paint these, but just coat them with the black powders. It creates a really good effect. Some I'll go a little bit lighter with, others I'll go kind of heavy with in terms of buildup. But you can see that bit of color detail. It makes these really stand out. It makes them look like separate parts, and that's really the great thing about any kind of application of powders or anything like this. You can really enhance certain parts to make them look like separate pieces. Like some parts are a little bit rustier than others, other parts are a little dustier. It just really creates this really cool effect. But I'm going to be basically repeating this process for all the trucks. We'll go ahead and move on to the fuel tank here though. Since we're on this side of the locomotive, we'll go ahead and start working on the... Just like with the trucks, I'm just going to be going in here with this dark rust color. And I'm just going to be putting it in very, very gently in certain areas. Mostly tucked underneath the fuel tank where there's going to be a lot of that grime, a lot of grease, and a lot of rust building up. This is where that's really going to be concentrated. I'm not going to try to streak this down too much over the sides of the fuel tank. I'm just going to be building this mostly at the top. And you do have to go a little bit light with this color because even though it's a dark rust, it still can be a little bit overbearing. So you have to be kind of careful with that. I'll go ahead and hit up this air tank here on the top too. Mostly concentrating that color on the top portion of the tank. Kind of come in here and I'll just start tucking it really into that top corner of the tank. Just brush some of that in there. And then also on the ends, because the ends are going to be a big place where a lot of that will kind of pick up. And then I'll just go ahead and come back and we'll start fanning that out a little bit just to add some more color detail to that piece. Now I can come back with some of that white powder and I'm just going to go ahead and start streaking some of this down the side of the fuel tank like this to get some of those rain streak effects. This is something I really like to do. I did this effect on the CSX 8901 that I have, that SD40-2, the black one. With that black fuel tank, it usually will stand out a little bit better, but you can still get some pretty good effects even on lighter colored fuel tanks like this. Right now I'm just working on the defined streaks. I'll come back and fan this out a little bit with the brush, a different brush. But right now I'm just looking to get all those little streaks of all the dust and everything just built up in progressive little layers. I'm going to go ahead and come back in with the micro brush and some black. I'm going to be doing some fuel tank streaking. A lot of the fuel gets spilled on the areas around the gauges and everything like that. This particular unit has this dark spot on the back of the tank where there was apparently a lot of fuel spillage and it's starting to streak down. I've already applied some of the powders to that area, but I'll demonstrate this side here where this other gauge is. Just concentrate your streaking around areas like the gauge, the dials, everything like that. Little raised areas where some of that fuel as it's running down might catch and create a line streak. So I just put in the defined line with the micro brush first. That's the first thing. I build it up at the top. Remember, most of that spillage is going to be at the top there. Once we've done that, then we can come back with the regular brush. I'll carefully come in here so I'll stabilize everything, and then I'll just fan all that out like this. And that's the great thing with these powders, you can really work them in as much as you need. I'm not trying to work them in too much. I still want to keep those defined lines, but I just want to blend it, make it a little bit softer just like that.